Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Man, we got a really rainy day here in Oklahoma. I'm gonna do something a little bit different. I'm gonna fire up the laptop. I'm gonna go off and answer all those questions, all those comments that you guys have been sending in. You'll also wanna stick around to the very end. We're gonna do a giveaway. Come on, let's go inside. All right, here we go. Questions on can bass really live this shallow? Let's start going down through here. Winter transition bite if possible. Chad S. I live in Seattle and the bite is getting a lot less even this early in the fall. What should we be doing up north for more aggressive bites? Okay, Chad, first, I've never fished the Northwest. I would love to. But here's my take on what happens in the winter. You know, I have caught fish over all this part of the country, really shallow, until it gets too cold, like low 40s. I mean, those fish will be super, super shallow. That water's in the mid 40s. I've caught them on a buzzbait when it's been 50, 52. We talked about that in another video. You know, I think when you're not catching them, you just got to think outside the box a little bit, move shallower. So many times when I miss them, I'm fishing beyond them. Generally, like let's take whatever lake it is and you go and you start fishing your day in 6, 7 feet of water, and then you move a little deeper to 10, 12 feet of water, and you move deeper 15 to 20 feet of water and you're still not really catching them. Generally, I missed them right off the bat. They're shallower than I started fishing. So, and I tend to think that's the case a lot of times in the fall. Those fish get really shallow on flat stuff, at least in this part of the country. So, you know, the winter transition bite there, you know, you might have to think about whatever body of water you have. Current, no current, when do they leave that current, when do they get out of it, when do they get in it too. So that'd be something to think about also. All right, we're gonna move on. Great question, Chad. I appreciate you sending it in. Mike Bailey sent, I'm hoping for a lesson on how to fish the warm water power plant lake, especially how to figure out the seasons because the water doesn't change like a normal lake. Great question, Mike. I've fished some power plant lakes. I have fished, I don't know where you're from, and that's one thing going forward, guys. You know, we're doing these giveaways when you comment, to all you guys that send these comments in. So, you know, we're giving those bag of pecans away, but tell me where you're from when you send me that question because that really helps me, you know, decipher my answer. But so back to your question, Mike. I have fished in power plant lakes in Arkansas. I fished some down in Texas, some up in Illinois. You know, some of the power plant lakes are just completely riprap. There's no structure, no logs, no weeds, no grass, nothing. But then you got power plant lakes like Monticello that's got hydrilla and standing timber and all those things. So they're really, really neat lakes. But to answer your question a little bit further, they do have seasons, but they're just, I think, ahead of everything else. You know, I know like the power plant lake over in Arkansas, like the colder it is, the Monticello, the colder it is, they really generate water. You know, you've had this cool down, then that water starts to warm, say the 1st of December, that's when that spawn happens. So, you know, and they'll spawn multiple times. It's just like they start spawning in November and they'll spawn all the way to like April in those power plant lakes, to where a normal lake, they just have that 1, 3, 4 week window, 5 week window of them spawning, and they don't do it the rest of the time. So keep that in mind. You know, when you're at those power plant lakes, you've got water, you've got bass in all seasons, I guess. Let's say you've got them in the fall, you got them in winter season, you got them in spring season, all in 1 week, because they all do it at different times. They all have so many opportunities to spawn. You know, one thing that's a common denominator with all power plant lakes is they've got some current. You know, when that current's flowing, there's always going to be fish relating to that current, to the points. You know, out in the middle of that current, you can find any little rock piles, humps, brush piles. Always keep that in mind. And then generally you've got a cold water side of the lake, and a lot of times those fish on that cold water side, they're just as normal as can be. You know, they're not affected by all the different temperature changes if that power plant lake's big enough. But use that current to your advantage. That's the main thing that I take away from power plant lakes. And it's a great place to go when it's super, super cold, because that's when that water's really heating up, and you can use those discharges and really get after them and catch some fish. So great question, Mike. I appreciate you sending that in. Howard House asks, how about the approach to fish a main lake point? Steep-sided versus shallow, different approaches for different times of the year. Thanks for asking us for input. Great question, Howard. That's a big question. Just, man, how to go fish points. That sounds to me like I better go do a Project E video on that, just on points. I did a really cool video on points, how shallow they get on them. You can go back in there and look at it. I killed them on a topwater. It was just epic day, but they're just really shallow, flat points that I like to look for, early in the fall. The steep-sided things, that's when those fish are going to transition over to that winter time. They want to be where they can be next to deep water, up next to a bluff, those kinds of things. So I think of that stuff winter and early spring when they're on that steep side. I think of summer and fall when they're more on those shallow sides. But that's kind of how I approach them. It's going to be a crankbait, topwater, football jig, those kinds of things that I'm going to look for. And with points, that's the greatest thing about them. They are just a fish magnet. There's fish on them year round. Fish even spawn on those points. I've caught fish spawning off main lake points a bunch of different times. But thanks for the question, Howard. I really appreciate it. Okay, Chad S. sent in a great question here. What are those end bumpers called at the end of your poles? I know Roland uses them, but I can't seem to find them anywhere. Those are called cushiots. Lunacy makes them. They sell them at all the Bass Pros. You can go to the website. I'll throw up some links here on this video for you guys. It just really gives you a lot of cushion on the end of your rod when you set the hook so you don't bruise your ribs. It gives you a lot of buoyancy to your rod still. I can't tell you how many times I kicked the rod off the side and that sucker's still floating out there like a bobber. So it's just a great tool for that. But great question, Chad. I really do appreciate it. Handy Dad High School. I'd like to listen to you talk about the bass transitions. Just trying to understand better, especially with these weird weather and temp changes up here in the Northeast. Great question, Handy Dad HS. I say high school, I'm just assuming high school coach or something. Great question, man. Thanks a lot for watching along and following and sending the comment in. Transitions. Okay, here's man, that's a hard question. You gave me a good one, a really hard one. Bass transitions. I think there's a couple different bass. I think there's bass that they live where they live 365 days a year. They may, let's take a dock for an instance. They may live in the back of that dock, the front of that dock, but they don't leave that dock or the dock beside it. They just have a very, very small home range. They probably feed on crawdads and bluegills. They don't do a lot of moving. But then you have a bass that may be out off points and he goes out to the main lake, then he goes back in that pocket to spawn, back and forth. So those transitions, I kind of think maybe is what you're asking about. For me, if I go to a body of water and I'm trying to determine what's going on, and you mentioned in your question here the weird weather and temp changes, the highs and the lows. Just fish the entire pocket. Start at the mouth of it, fish all the way around to the back, all the way out to the front. One great example of this, and I'm not trying to plug something else, but man, when we go to fish those cup events, those Major League Fishing Cup events, they go and put us on a body of water that we've never seen. We don't have any knowledge of it. I don't know if there's smallmouth, largemouth, spotted bass. I don't know anything. And you can watch anglers dive off and figure out whatever lake we're on for that day, or not figure it out. I've been on both ends of that spectrum, but you'll see me have every bait tied on that I have a lot of confidence in, and I'll just start trying to pick that water apart. A lot of times I'm hitting really high percentage spots, points and channel swings and rock changes and isolated docks and whatever it is. When I'm going to a new body of water, I just try to pick out different things in that body of water and try to fish as many of them as I possibly can. I know that doesn't quite answer your question as far as bass transitions. I think the transitions of bass are more triggered on days of the amount of daylight versus the temperature. I think, you can have your days are getting shorter, but yet that water temperature really hadn't changed. Your days are getting longer and that water temperature hadn't changed, spring and fall. And I think that's really what triggers a lot of movement, because I know in my past, I've caught them all the way back up in the back of a pocket on a shallow laydown really early, like when the water's still hot, but it's they're already moving back there, a lot earlier than the water temperature changing. So I kind of view, what triggers that is the daylight. There's a lot to it. That's, that really probably needs to be a Project E, Handy Dad. I'm just going to tell you right there. We need to go out there and we need to look at bluff banks transitioning to pea gravel. We need to, take a creek and maybe talk about those fish being at the mouth versus the back, and when and how and why, or maybe make it a 3-4 part series where we fish one pocket all year long at different times in the year and just see where the bass are at. I think that's a great idea. I think we'll go do that, and I want to appreciate you for that idea. It'll be a good Project E for you guys to follow along. Thanks for the question and the idea. Didn't even know you gave it to me. So, man, here's just a great comment from Fishing with Deacon. Man, he's truly inspired because he laughs at me every time because I have so much fishing. And here, Fishing It with Deacon looks like he's starting his own YouTube channel, going to Barbie Lake in Indiana. So go out there and give him a shout. And man, I wish you the best. I hope you catch a bunch of fish there. And thanks a lot for following along, bud. Moving on down, how did you find that undercut bank? I just happened on it, I think of undercut banks and how to find those things is a lot of times it's a soft bottom. It's not going to ever be a rock bottom. It's going to be a soft bottom that a predominant wind would hit a bank to where it can wash that out, but yet you have vegetation on top. That's the only places I've ever seen them, is where there's soft bottom but good vegetation growing on the bank to hold that soil on top, but yet erode some of that underneath. But great question there. Thanks a lot for following along. Andrew K said, man, Tuesday's one of my favorite days of the week. Thank you, Andrew. I appreciate that a bunch. But moving on. Hooked 'em Pescados in Austin sent me a question. Let us know about the bait and tackle you're using. You mentioned the general worm and the Chapo, but what colors and sizes and what type of line work best for those conditions? I was using Chapo 120. It was that medium-sized Chapo, or Chapo 100. I don't know. It's a medium-sized Chapo. I've got it on 50-pound braid. I like it on a medium to medium heavy rod, a 7/4-foot rod. The general was on a spinning rod, 15-pound braid tied to probably a 10-pound leader. A lot of times I go 8 to 10 depending on where I'm fishing and what I'm doing, but just a little straight shank hook, something really simple, just a 5-inch general. So that was on like a 6.9 medium action rod, high speed reel. So appreciate you sending in the question, guys. Let's just wind this up just a little bit here. I saw one down through here that I thought might be good. That guy really likes the drone shots. I do too. Those things are really cool. I learn a lot from that drone. It's just amazing. Here's a great question from Kickin' Bass TV. Again, man, I appreciate you following along. You're a great viewer. Do you ever turn your units off, when I'm fishing shallow? And man, I absolutely do. When I'm in there shallow fishing docks or shallow cover where I don't need to know the depth, I turn those things off. I've been out swimming around my boat in the summertime, and you can hear that pinging from a long ways off from those transducers. So absolutely, I think it's a thing that an angler can do. Turn those depth finders off, put them in standby to just be a little bit more stealthy when you're in the water in those pressured situations. So I definitely do. Great question. Thanks a lot for watching, bud. Here's one more question here from Robert Chadwick. Great question. Looks like I was using high vis line. I do. I use the yellow high vis line on my braid, because I'm going to always tie a leader to it, a short 6 to 10 foot leader. I like that high vis line when I'm throwing that weightless general out there. It kind of acts as a bobber. That line will be sitting on the water. I can see it. And if it takes off moving really quick, I know I've got a bite. Even though that fish may be coming back at me or going a different direction, it just acts as a bobber. It's really cool. So I really like that high vis line with a fluorocarbon leader. But Man, I really appreciate you guys watching. Appreciate you sending in all the comments, hitting that thumbs up and those like buttons and subscribing. This week, my random winner is Chris Gabriel. Got a package of fresh pecans. These are as fresh as they come, right off the tree out at the farm. I'm gonna mail these to you. Hope you and your family enjoy them. You need to send me an email on my website, edwinevers.com. There's a place right there you can send me an email. Send me your address, and I'm going to get those things coming back to you. So, guys, I appreciate you, the comments, the questions, following along. Tune in next week for more of this stuff, and good fishing out there.